So photography isn't an easy art. Like there's a lot to learn and everybody has their own learning process. In fact, even me, like after doing this for 5 years and having experience in weddings or even smaller events like bridal showers, birthday parties, or real estate photography or other client work, after all of that experience, there's still a lot for me to learn and there's a lot of mistakes I make. In fact, all photographers make mistakes, even the ones that have mastered photography. Now, when I was learning about photography, I learned a lot from the internet about like big mistakes you shouldn't be doing, like ISO, like don't keep it too high, or maybe don't crank your shutter speed low, keep your aperture nice and clean, all of that nice stuff about composition and lighting. But there was not really a lot about how to carry yourself as a photographer or how to plan out your shoots or all those other soft skills. And as a beginner or even an intermediate photographer, getting client work can be frustrating because you have no idea what to do, and like all you see on the internet is really either like fully hard skills about the basics of photography like composition and exposure, or you could see the whole business side about like invoices and pricing. But there's not really much about, well, how to carry yourself as a photographer. And that's why I'm making this, because I believe there's a lot of mistakes that I still make personally as a photographer that I believe every photographer, especially beginner photographer, should know. So here's 6 photography mistakes that every photographer makes and how to fix them. So getting straight to number 1 on my list, that would be not planning your shoots enough. Now, yeah, you might have some base level of planning, like maybe this is what I'm envisioning my end result to look like, but you're not really planning a whole bunch of factors. Like what I did when I was beginning to get more client work was I would just pack my whole bag with every single camera gear I had, including lighting and everything. And I would take these 1 or 2 bags to the location, and then I'd decide what types of shots do I want or what type of gear do I want to use. But that's not how you should do it. Rather, you should plan ahead and don't just show up with your camera, but rather know what you're gonna do. Now, some of the factors that I think you should definitely be planning for is number 1, whether you wanna know, is it raining, is it sunny, or like what types of pictures am I gonna get in this weather, and like obviously dress yourself accordingly. But also dress your, maybe if you're shooting a human being, dress your model accordingly too. And also make sure to protect your gear if it is raining. Now, aside from that, also maybe your location too, just so you know what types of shots to get and what to expect at that location. Maybe like how much traffic, how much rush, and like what's the best shots to shoot at that location. Now, number 3, in my opinion, the most important, that is going to be the subject. Like what color is your subject going to be, or like if they're a human being, what colors are they wearing? And also number 2, what poses, like if you're shooting an object, what angles do you want to shoot the object at? Or if you're shooting a human being, what poses do you want them to be in? Now, also along with that, you definitely do want to pick a vibe or a feeling or a mood that you're trying to go for, or maybe your client is asking for. And based off of that, you are going to make specific choices about the shots. And speaking of the shots, try to keep a brief idea of what types of shots you want in your mind. Like maybe a specific wide shot, a specific medium shot, a specific close-up. Like try to have that type of sketch in your mind, but at the same time, don't try to be too exact about what you do have, because there's going to be X and Y factors. There's going to be different circumstances that you are going to be in, and you can't really predict everything. But yeah, overall, those are some factors that I think you should definitely take into consideration when planning your shoot. And I think planning your shoot would be really beneficial in different ways. Number 1 would be you're being more efficient, you're saving time, and that's saving your clients time too if you're working for clients. But also you're saving yourself time, and you know what the saying is, time is money. And number 2, you're also looking more professional in front of your clients, which makes number 1, their satisfaction rate high. But also number 2, if they are satisfied, they're more likely to encourage you to other clients as well. So that's overall a win for you. And also number 3, don't be like me and just like take all of your gear every time, but like rather when you're planning ahead, you do get to choose specific gear that you want. Like suppose if you're shooting portraits, you're probably not going to take a 16-35 2.8, but rather maybe a 50mm or 85mm, and you do get to like take gear accordingly. And less gear means less weight, which means less weight that you have to carry around, which in my opinion, that's a great thing. But yeah, all in all, plan ahead and don't just show up with a camera. Now, number 2 on my list is kind of the opposite of number 1, but it's not exactly, and you'll get that in a second. But it's basically don't be afraid to experiment. Now you may be thinking, well, I just told you to plan ahead and plan for everything. and just stick to what you have planned. And that is true to some extent, but you also have to be a bit flexible, which is why I did mention don't really plan all your shots in detail, but rather wait for the circumstances that are going to be there and wait for all the X and Y factors, and then like plan in what shots you want to get. And that is what I'm trying to get into here, which is don't be afraid to experiment with your shots. Like don't be afraid to like maybe try different lighting, or maybe try a different angle, maybe try moving around in the location, especially if it's like a big park or like a big museum or something. Just overall, there's nothing wrong with experimenting. Like worst case, maybe you move around for a bit, maybe like 5 minutes, and you don't really get a new shot, but at least you tried. Like on the flip side, if you don't experiment, you may be missing out on an even better shot. Like I definitely think it's great to experiment, and don't just be fixated on the one shot you want. Maybe like just try moving around, and you never know what you're gonna get. And the same applies after you're done your shoot. Like wherever you're editing in Lightroom or Apple Photos or Capture One or whatever you use to edit, you can use a lot of different features in all these programs now. Like it's 2024, we even have like generative AI on Photoshop, which works surprisingly well. Like there's a lot of endless possibilities. And once again, what's the risk? Like you wasted a minute or two in trying to get a better shot. Like on the flip side, if you don't do this, you might be missing out on a lot. So overall, don't be afraid to experiment. Now, number 3 is also a big one, and this is something that you're gonna find in pretty much every YouTube video about beginner photography tips or photography mistakes you shouldn't make, or any of those clickbaity titles that I probably used too. And that is focusing too much on the gear. Now, that's probably the number 1 mistake every photographer makes at some point at their photography journey. Now, don't get me wrong, gear is definitely necessary to tell a great story. Like, obviously an early Alexa is gonna shoot better than like an iPhone 12. That's no doubt about it. Even an iPhone 15 compared to like something like my decade-old GH4, there's no competition between those two. But at the same time, you can't really focus too much on the gear. Like not every beginner needs a Sony FX3 with like a 24 to 70 G master lens. Like all of that's obviously completely unnecessary, and you definitely should build your gear closet as you grow based off of what you need. Like for example, I started off my photography journey with this, the Panasonic GH4, and it worked great, but at the end of its life, like after about 5 to 6 years, it definitely had a lot of problems. Like for example, touchscreen didn't work, and then the viewfinder right there, super dusty, and even the leather's like all peeling off right about here. You get the idea. Like it was at the end of its life, and there's not really much you could do about that. And the main point is upgrade your gear when necessary, and you should evaluate what your needs are and what your wants are. Like don't be like me and buy a gimbal when you're like still 1 or 2 years into photography. That's probably one of my worst financial decisions. And it's cool, like there's some stuff you do want, but also be sure you're actually gonna use it and you do have a need for it for some extent. Otherwise, if it's just like something like a GoPro or a gimbal that you use like 2-3 times, maybe for a week or 2, and then it's on your shelf gathering dust for the next 5 years, that's a pretty bad decision in my opinion. So I'd suggest maybe focus less on the gear and focus more on your story. And as you build your story, as you build your work, your gear automatically is going to grow as you grow. Oh, and also if I didn't convince you there and you're still going to buy gear on Black Friday or whatever, here's 2 tips for buying gear. Number 1, if you don't use it, feel free to return it. There's nothing bad in returning it. Most places have like a 14-day or a 30-day return policy, and there's nothing bad in returning it. And number 2 on this list would be, well, focus more on the lens instead of the camera. Like the cameras are cool, but at this point, especially if you're doing photography, lens definitely matter more. And I feel like as well AI and technology and computers and all of that black magic like progresses into the future, you don't really need a expensive body as much, but you still do need lenses because you can't really replicate having a better focal length or even, well, a better depth of field or all of that stuff. You just can't really replicate any of that. So always focus more on the lens than the body. Now moving forward, number 4 on my list is following the fundamentals too hard. And this basically means, let's say ISO, composition, shutter speed, aperture, lighting, exposure, all that different stuff. And that's all the fundamentals, that's all the basics. Every photographer should definitely like learn all of that stuff. But at the same time, you can't always follow it. Like there's times that you are gonna step out of the normal composition, and maybe you're gonna have a lot of negative space, or maybe you're not gonna have any negative space at all. Or maybe you're trying to be super creative and you're overexposed or underexposed, or your shutter speed's completely off. You get the idea. You shouldn't really be always following like this basics super hard. Otherwise, well, there's not really anything too creative about your shot. Everybody's shots are gonna be the exact same, like perfect shutter speed, perfect aperture, perfect exposure, perfect composition with rules of thirds and everything. And there's not really going to be anything unique to your shot, which is why my saying is know the basics, but don't always follow the basics. Like it's cool to use them when you're doing maybe just a normal model shoot for like LinkedIn or whatever, but don't really always like stick super hard to it. And also another example would be, let's say you're shooting family pictures. Maybe you're shooting pictures of your own kids at vacation. You're not really going to worry about, well, I need an ISO of 800, shutter speed of 1/60, aperture of f7, and like I need an ND filter on it too to keep it completely smooth. Like you can't really focus on any of that when you're just taking a candid shot in the moment, but rather you kind of just want to leave your camera on auto and take the picture, and that's it. So that being said, I guess once again, know the basics, but don't always follow the basics, and more so, know when to use basic rules and know when to not use them. And I personally believe that's something that every photographer should be super mindful of. So next on my list is, well, number 5, and that's editing. Now, either you've overdone it or underdone it, and that could be messy because under editing it is pretty much, well, I guess, maybe just uploading the raw onto Instagram and calling it a day. I've had those moments in my life and I see a lot of other people doing it. But yeah, that's pretty much really bland, and you don't really want to do that if you're trying to attract more people to your photography. Now on the other side, over editing it is arguably worse because there's people that literally, it's pretty much acting up like, well, I paid for the whole contrast slider, so I'm going to use the whole contrast slider. Like, bro, that's not going to make your pictures look creative. It's going to make your pictures look like garbage. And if nobody said that to you, I'm going to be the first person saying that to you. Don't turn your contrast slider, your vignette slider, your black point slider, or even your warmth all the way up to 100 or, well, negative or whatever. But outside of that, also don't get carried away with generative AI or sky replacement or any of the other AI stuff. Like, yeah, I've said that's something that you should experiment with back in the video. But at the same time, don't get too carried away with it because people can eventually tell it is fake if you go too far with it. Now, lastly, in the editing section, I would say don't really like just see your picture, edit it, and then post it on Instagram immediately, unless, well, it's client work and you have to do it ASAP. But if you're doing it for yourself or you still have some time to like kill, maybe I would say give it a few hours or maybe even sleep on it and like wake up the next morning and look at it again. You're most likely gonna notice more changes after leaving the picture alone for a few hours or even a whole day. So I definitely suggest sleeping on pictures or just leaving them alone for a few hours and then opening them again. I think that's gonna be something that you're really gonna benefit from. But yeah, that's all cool. And number 6, well, my 6th point is kind of a rant, and that's basically don't try to be Peter McKinnon or Chris Howe or Matty Hapoya or anybody you saw on YouTube or Instagram. Rather, try to be yourself. And yeah, fine, Peter McKinnon's cool. I like his videos too. I've been watching them since before he even had 1 million subscribers. But that being said, I'd still not say try to copy him. Like, he's definitely inspiring. At the end of the day, you're not Peter McKinnon. You're yourself. Peter McKinnon's Peter McKinnon, and he's gonna do his own thing. The world doesn't need a new Peter McKinnon. The world needs another unique thing, and there's only one of yourself, and you're the only person that can be yourself. I don't know if I made sense there. And yeah, at the end of the day, fine, you might have a personality like Peter McKinnon, but let's be honest, there's a difference between having that personality and outright just like trying to copy him. Like, there's a difference, and it kind of gets obvious and it kind of gets weird too. And at the end of the day, there's only one of you in the world. There's not really two of you, and at the same time, the world doesn't need another Peter McKinnon. The world already has a Peter McKinnon. The world wants something new and unique, and you could be that new and unique thing. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my video for today, and that's definitely a lot more rants than I expected to do based off of my notes. And I hope you did learn something out of it, and I hope you do take away something and become a better photographer. And that being said, also speaking of being a photographer, I'm gonna start posting on Instagram again, so make sure to follow me down in the link in description. And that being said, speaking of following me, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to comment something if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next video.